Good morning everybody, I'm Andy from Forest, a company that I founded 12 years ago. We're specialists in automation solutions based out of London, Singapore and the US, and our offerings are DevOps transformations, continuous delivery and deployment and continuous integration. Here to talk to you about transforming organisational culture, processes and practices in the context of DevOps. Why? So why is why important? Simon Sinek tells us that great leaders and organisations communicate with their customers from the inside out. They focus on why they do things rather than how they do them and what they do. Can I have a show of hands for those anybody that's heard of Simon Sinek at all? Or seen his TED Talk? Yeah, not many. So his TED Talk, How Great Leaders Inspire People to Action, is the third highest TED Talk with nearly 23 million views so far. And I'll be using some of the concepts from Start With Why throughout this presentation. You will have all seen something similar to this. This is the pictorial representation of the DevOps challenge. Development and operations, separate teams, separate objectives, separate processes, tools, directives. And what we're here to talk about today is how we embark on a DevOps transformation to try and address some of the challenges that this culture will present organisations. So key components of DevOps and a DevOps transformation: collaboration of people, convergence of process, and the creation and exploitation of tools. So this is getting people to work together on shared processes with shared tooling underpinning that. And all for the purposes of supporting flow. The flow of the right value to the customer. The word right is important here. How we align people, process and tooling to ensure that what the customer receives as a delivery is what they ask for and what they expect and when they expect it. I'm sure, like me, many of you will have worked on projects in the past where by the time our enormous release finally gets to the customer, they want something completely different. So, collaboration of people. When we're surrounded by people who believe what we believe, something remarkable happens. Trust emerges. Now, I think this is a great quote. It's something that is very important to me, trust. I'm motivated and enjoy working with trustworthy, loyal people. And I think when we're looking to improve collaboration, it's important to understand the culture and the makeup of the organisations that we'll be working with. So what's a community? A group of people with a like-minded, with a common set of values and beliefs. But that's groups and teams, that's not an organisation, that's just reinforces silos, development. They've got their values and beliefs. Operations, they've got their values and beliefs. And what we're looking at is a culture of collaboration. But what is culture? The set of shared attitudes, values, goals and practices that characterise an organisation or an institution across the organisation, breaking down those silos. And the key attributes of culture: values, goals, practices and attitudes. Values: who we are, who the company is. We're the only company in the world focused on build automation. Non-business example, I'm a dedicated father. What's the goal? What are the goals that you're setting out for your business? I want to deliver one new feature request every day to my customers. I want to get home to read bedtime stories to the kids twice a week. What are the practices that will help you achieve your goals? Agile for software delivery, flexible working so I can get home. And the attitudes, open and honest versus closed and defensive. But now we know what makes up a culture. How do we go about implementing or even identifying the culture? We set about a process where we determine the values that you want to be instilled in the organisation, and you create the goals there to support the business needs, but that are consistent with your values, the practices that simplify the process towards those goals, and you test these with the attitudes of your employees. And again, an example, I want to be the most innovative cloud provider. I want to deliver one new feature every day. I'm going to implement continuous deployment and fully automated testing to enable me to deliver that. And my organisation, the culture is going to be open, honest, and with shared objectives. So once you have your to-be state, as you're going through the journey of establishing or rolling out that culture within an organisation, you need to continually assess your as-is against your to-be. Listen carefully to the attitudes of your employees. Which values aren't being embraced? Have you set the wrong values? Are you not enabling your employees? Have you not explained to them, why you're going on this journey so they're embracing those values? Examine the current goals and where they are against your future goals, and adjust and tweak any working practices along the way. And there should be a singularity of purpose with culture. The whole organisation needs to be behind the change. As Scott McNeely, the former CEO of Sun Microsystems, once put it very succinctly, we're going to put all the wood behind the arrow. And in fact, in Deming's 7 Deadly Diseases of Management, disease number 1, lack of constancy of purpose. To plan product and service that will have a market and keep the company in business and provide jobs. But when we're going for this, when we're asking people to change and for this level of focus and buy-in, how do we achieve that? And this is back to start with why and Sinek's golden circle. As I said earlier, the great leaders and organisations communicate from the inside out, and this golden circle actually matches the cross-section of the brain. The outer circle, the neocortex, deals with the facts and figures, the black and the white. But the inner limbic brains deal with behaviour and feelings. How many times have you heard, I get it, but it just doesn't feel right? It's important that we inspire the company and encourage them and get them on the bus, on the journey of the transformation, because we're here to support our customers. This is our customer, spotty teenager. We build in this just so we can drive this. DevOps is all about flow. Flow of the right value to the customer. Next component is convergence of process. And I'd like to start with another favourite quote of mine. Efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things. And for me, this is about a constant evaluation of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Does it meet my organisation's goals? Does it meet my personal goals? And I think it's important that when we're trying to, when we're looking to move people to shared working practices, that we understand the history behind where the current practices may have come from. There's a number of influencing fields of studies which are largely responsible for the organisations that we all work in today and the working practices. And we'll touch upon, we'll go into these in a little more detail now. Agile. This is the Agile Manifesto. I'm sure many of you know it. Released in 2001. I'm not going to read it to you, but for me, considering this was released in 2001, when the de facto standard for software development was waterfall, I think responding to change over following a plan is the most transformational. The one thing you always did in waterfall was follow the plan. Why would you respond to any change? Why would you ask for any feedback? You'd wait right till the end and release it and see what happens. And this is how Agile looks versus waterfall. And again, for me, what behaviour does this encourage in people? On the left-hand side, I've got a lengthy process. Lengthy process equals less frequent deployments. Less frequent deployments equals a tendency to put a bit more in them. And where do we end up? The stereotypical massive release, 2 days over a weekend, every single team within your IT organisation are there, pizzas galore, fraught with risk. On the right hand side, fluid, cyclic, short cycles of innovation, far more difficult to plan, but much more importantly, part of Agile is about responding to change ahead of plan, responding to change. So the behaviour that this leads you to is smaller batches of work, smaller amounts of content, released more frequently to get earlier feedback, to assess whether you're on the right path or not. And the most common implementation of Agile? Scrum. I'm sure it's familiar to most of you here. Small batches, planned into 2 to 3 week sprints, daily Scrum meetings. What did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? Blockers. That's it. And the key piece for me, potentially shippable product increment. And this is where we start to see a divergence of what's acceptable for development and operations. So how do we make operations agile? Agile operations is actually the precursor to DevOps, and it was the movement to introduce agile and lean concepts to operations. Fundamentally, Scrum doesn't work for operations. The ideas are sound, but they're not complete for an operations mindset, and therefore they reinforce silos rather than break them down. But why doesn't Scrum work for ops? Now, I have no allegiance to development or operations. I've worked in both and across the two. But operations have got a really tough job. They've got 4 types of work. They've got new services, they've got upgrading existing services, so we could have new online gaming portal for a new service. I need a new data center or data center consolidation for internal projects, planned and unplanned changes. Developers just have to build stuff. Operations people historically, it's been a very traditional study of management. Learnt on MBAs, including project management, process management, quality scheduling, and previously focused on manufacturing, but now making its way more and more into the software world. And operations think of systems. A shiny new AngularJS user interface might be an awesome design achievement, might look fantastic, yeah, and it was done in half the time that you would expect. But operations are interested in whether that connects to the middle tier and back to the database so customers can place their orders. They have to think of the whole rather than the individual components. But there are challenges to this. Imagine what happened if your company burned down. Would you build it again exactly the same way? What if Amazon built a bank? Would they build a bank the same way that Lloyds and Barclays have built a bank? Would they keep their charges high, their benefits low? Or would they, like a certain cloud provider, continually lower their prices, continually innovate with their products out to their customers, completely change the game? And if you can't imagine working without constraints, so you could do whatever you wanted, at whatever pace, whatever complexity, how do you think you'll know what to do with constraints? Operations work a lot around theory of constraints. The thinking of the system and looking at that as an end-to-end process, all of the constituent parts, and where is the bottleneck within there. And the theory of constraints, briefly, the thought behind it is that any manageable system is limited in achieving its goals by a small number, often one, constraint. And this is all about bottlenecks and removing the bottlenecks. So if we give an example, identifying system constraints, it's in the process of getting new servers, it takes 2 days to physically rack it and patch it. So to exploit that system's constraints, what we need to do is make sure that the moment one cycle of work is complete by that constraint, there is another piece of work waiting there for them. Because the fastest you will move through that system is the speed of that constraint. Subordination to the above decision is effectively re-engineering your process, so all activities, processes downstream of your constraint are aligned to ensure that there's a buffer of work sitting there for the constraint. And this is important because if one of those breaks down, there's still a cache of work there for the constraint to perform. And once you get to the point where you've maximised your process and your throughput through the slowest part of your system, if throughput still isn't high enough, then you elevate the constraint. And an example of that here could be, we will virtualise. So rather than using physical hardware, we'll virtualise. And now we hit step 5 and the constraint's broken. We virtualised, so the provision of the physical tin, or the virtual tin now, is no longer the constraint, so you go back to the top and continue. And drum buffer rope is a great simple way of showing this. The drum at 2 per hour, that is the constraint in your system. And what you have to do is make sure that downstream you always have a cache of work that's available for that. And the moment the drum beat completes a cycle of work, it pulls through the next cycle. Lastly, Lean. I'm sure most of you have heard of the Toyota production system. Back in the 70s and 80s, I hope I haven't got too many Americans here, US car manufacturers, their cars were notoriously unreliable. They did their testing at the end of production. So Toyota came in with the Toyota production system, lean principles, quality control throughout the production line, and overtook the US car manufacturers practically overnight. But the focus of lean really is around eliminating waste. And many of those lean concepts will be familiar today. Kaizen, Kanban, 5 Whys. So now we've gone through now we understand how organisations are made up, how the practices, where they originate from. We're actually in a position where we can look to design and develop unified processes which meet the requirements of both stakeholders in development and operations. And for me, people follow processes that are underpinned by tools. So I'm pleased to say we are on the last of the components for DevOps, and this is easy from my perspective. Once the culture and the processes are correct, tools are the easy piece. So can I have a show of hands for anybody that would disagree that they're DevOps tools? That was easy. Can I have a show of hands for anybody that thinks these are DevOps tools? Really? And how about this one? So, hands up who's been to a DevOps meetup. Surely we can get one hand up in the room. There we go. All right. So those that have been to a DevOps meetup will know that beer and pizza are quite appealing and quite capable of filling rooms. But in all seriousness, what is a DevOps tool? Any tool that aids the convergence of process and the collaboration of people with the objective of supporting flow to the customer. Does it meet the requirements? More seriously, shared metrics in a DevOps culture with development and operations, shared tooling, both sharing an interest in what has happened here to cause that. So I would summarise DevOps is all about customers. It is all about flow and the flow of the right value to the customer. It is about pride and workmanship. This is about you're no longer a number, and it sounds cheesy, but you're an integral part of a shared objective. You're not, on one side of the enemy line from, operations or development, etc. So working alongside your peers in the organisation for a shared goal. And if you're like me, you're working with people you trust towards something you believe in and would be proud of. And you get beer and pizza at meetups. Why would you not be having fun? Thank you. Now, I'm definitely early, so I've left myself woefully exposed for questions now. Can I just tell you that lunch is waiting for you?